Hello everyone. Apologies guys, my other session overran by 2 or 3 minutes. Let's wait for 1 or 2 minutes for others to dial in and we'll get started. Yeah. Uh, so we're going to talk about web service basics today. So I've sent out a communication yesterday to the Fusion Technical Batch students that yes, I'm going to cover web service basics, which is same as covered in OIC training. So quite a few of the students who are attending in this batch are from OIC batch. Okay, so they're attending sessions in OIC as well. So they know they've already attended the web service basic session that I'm going to take today for your batch. So that's why I've asked them to skip it if they want. Yeah, probably they might not dial in, and we could keep this as an interactive session, Leah, if you want. If you get any questions, we can you can stop me at any point.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, I'll share my screen. Let's get started. And before we proceed further, I'll take you to a particular slide in the introduction session. And if you remember, when you yeah, but I've talked about this. I've discussed this in the introduction session. Like when you load the data into Fusion applications, or when you export the data from Fusion applications, like when you do a data load or data extraction, you have few options available. Like when you do a data load, you have loaders, and when you do a data extraction, you can build a BAP or OTBA reports, right? But apart from these options, you also have something called as a web services that you can use. And web services are of two types, SOAP or REST. So you can use SOAP or REST web services to load the data into Fusion application. And you can also use the SOAP or REST web services to extract the information from Fusion application and share it with downstream systems. Okay, so so we will not be using these web services quite frequently in real time. In real time, when we do the data load as a technical consultant, we will be using FPDA or HCM data loader or spreadsheet data loader. But and when we do the extraction also, we will be using these options. Like you would be building a BAP or OTBI reports. But you have this additional option called SOAP or REST services that you can use to load the data into cloud application or extract the data from cloud. But these would be extensively used by the integration specialist. So alongside you, there will be an integrations team working. And what they will be doing is they will be building integrations in OIC that are required for the project. And in those integrations that they build in OIC, they might be invoking these APIs, the SOAP or REST services, to achieve this data load or a data extraction from cloud applications. So I'll explain how these work and how you can use SOAP and REST services to load the data and to extract the data in today's session. But you might not extensively use this in real time. So that is what I'm trying to highlight here. But this should give you a fair idea, like what exactly is the SOAP service, what is the REST service, etc. Okay, so let's get started with this knowledge. We'll go into the application. So we're going to talk about web service basics today. Well, I'll first talk about what exactly is a web service. And there are basically two types of web services available in the market, a SOAP service or a REST API. So we'll talk about both. And the way we try to and there are some terms associated with these web services. When it comes to SOAP service, you have terms like WSDL, XML associated with it. So we'll try to understand those basics. What exactly is a SOAP service? What is WSDL? What is XML? What is operation? How do you invoke it and all that stuff? And the way we understand the basics of REST and a SOAP is, we'll not go through the PPT. Instead, what we'll do is we'll pick up one of the API given by Oracle or one of the standard service given by Oracle. What Oracle did is, remember, we were doing the data load into Fusion Cloud application. We were building reports. All the components that we are doing it in Fusion Cloud application, right? So we will, and to interact with that Fusion Cloud application, Oracle has given a lot of standard APIs, or Oracle has given a lot of standard REST APIs as well as standard SOAP services as well. So we will pick up one of the standard REST API and we'll try to understand the basics. And similarly, we'll pick up one of the standard SOAP service and we'll also try to understand the basics of it. Okay. So yes, web services. What exactly are web services? You can think of them in layman terminology. You can think of them as services offered over web. So if you go to Google and type in something like what's weather like tomorrow or today, or what is the exchange rate from USD to INR, you might not know that you are invoking a web service in the backend, but that call goes out in the backend. An API might get invoked, and that would get you a response, and that response is rendered to you on the browser. So in your day-to-day life, you might be consuming a lot of web services without your knowledge. Okay, and web services, what does it do? It enables communication among various applications. Like if you think of web service users, there are basically two types of users that a web services have. You can use web services to build reusable application components. You can call them as APIs, such as currency conversion API or a weather report or a language translation. So these are the sort of components or APIs. You will build them once, and you can use them any number of times you want by passing in a different input, right? When you build a currency conversion API, of course you can invoke it with any from currency and to currency and from and to date, right? So that's one thing that you can do with web services. Meaning you can build reusable application components. And what's the other thing that you could do? The other thing that you could do is you can connect existing softwares. Like say, for example, if you want to connect ERP cloud with a HCM cloud, or you want to connect Salesforce with Oracle Cloud application, Oracle Fusion Cloud application, you can do such things also with the help of web services. Okay, so you can build reusable application components, and you can also connect existing softwares if you want. Okay, so what we do is we'll start off with REST APIs. Okay, and what we do is, before we don't go through the PPT, we will first go to the application, do a quick hands-on, and then we'll come back to the PPT. So for you to figure out what are the standard REST APIs given by Oracle, you can go into this Oracle Cloud documentation link. So copy this. I'm pasting it in the chat. So you can go to the standard URL. Kumar, I'm not sure if you have seen my message. I'm covering web service basics here. You can stay on, or if you want, you can drop off.
Yeah. Thank you, Prasad. I'm just testing the agent. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. And Suvadeep, it's same for you as well. I hope you have seen the message. If you still want to attend it, no problem at all.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, I woke up early, so that's why I joined.
Yeah. Okay. No problem.
Yeah.
And yes, so you can, if you want to see what are the standard REST or SOAP services given by Oracle, but to deal with Fusion Cloud application, you can go into this particular URL. So you can go to this docs.oracle.com, and this will give you, this will be like a central repository where you can find the standard SOAP or REST services given by Oracle. And here you have applications. You see different applications here. And you can go into the application of your choice, or the one that you are interested in. Say, for example, if you're interested in HR, you go into this. If you are interested in financials, you can go into this. And after you go into financials, on this left hand side, you have integrate option there, integrate. So you click on it. And after you click on it, you see that there are two options here. You have you see a link to access SOAP services given by Oracle, and you see a REST APIs given by Oracle. And these REST APIs or SOAP services given by Oracle will help you to interact with Financials Cloud application. Meaning, if you want to say create an invoice in Financials Cloud, you can do that. If you want to create a bank in Financials Cloud application, you can do that with the help of REST APIs. So it's like you have standard REST APIs and a standard SOAP services given by Oracle, which you could use to interact with Financials Cloud application. When I say interact, it could mean loading the data into the cloud application or pulling the data from cloud application. So first, let's start off with REST APIs, and then we'll move on to the SOAP services. So you click on review REST APIs, and what this will show you, if you go into this navigation option, it will show you the REST APIs given by Oracle for Financials Cloud application. So you click on review REST APIs. And if you see here, you scroll down, you could see a list of resources here. So in the case of REST APIs, it is in the case of REST APIs, everything is referred to as a resource. So what you see here is nothing but a resource. So if you see here this one, so this is basically a bank's resource. And you have if you scroll down further, you see REST APIs to REST APIs to create banks, bank accounts, bank branches. Remember, in cash management, you would need all this information. And if you scroll down further, you have APIs that will help you to create invoices, and you have REST APIs that will help you to create payables, payable transactions, and the receivable transactions as well. Say, for example, if you see here, remember the AR invoice print report that we have created. So if you want to load in AR invoice, or if you want to create AR invoice in ERP Cloud, you could make use of this REST resource. So if you want to load in invoices, what we typically do as a technical consultant is we will download AR invoice FPDA sheet. We'll do a bulk data upload. But as an alternative, if you want to create if you want to create an invoice using a web service based approach, yes, you can still do that. You can even invoke this receivables invoice API and create a receivables invoice in ERP Cloud. But when you use web services, you will not be able to do a bulk data upload. You will only be able to do a small data set. Okay, so that's the difference. So you have resources here. Say, for example, if you see this receivables invoice, this is everything that you see here is a resource. And this receivables invoice resource, what will it help you with? It will help you to create, get, update, and delete a receivables invoice. Okay, receivables invoice is nothing but AR invoice that we have seen in the AR invoice print report. So every resource that you see here, so the resources, all the resources will typically expose 5 endpoints. How many endpoints they expose? They expose 5 endpoints in general. And what will those endpoints help you with? They will help you to perform CRUD operations. What do we mean by CRUD operations? What do we mean by CRUD operations? It stands for create, read, update, and delete. And when you want to read the data, you can read a specific transaction, or you can read all the invoices. You can read a specific invoice, or you can read all the invoices. So every resource that you see here, so if you take the receivables invoice resource, you see that there is an option to create invoice. Okay, so that comes under create. You have 2 endpoints that would help you to read the invoice details. One endpoint will help you to fetch all the invoices. One will help you to fetch a specific invoice. And you also have endpoints to update and delete an invoice, right? So you basically, the resources that you see here would expose 5 endpoints, which will help you to perform CRUD operations on that particular entity. Okay, and we will not use receivables invoice. We'll pick up a slightly simpler example. So you scroll up, you see that there is a bank's resource in there. But again, the story is same. This particular resource also exposes 5 endpoints. or it has 5 REST endpoints, and these REST endpoints, you can use them to either create a bank, get all banks from ERP Cloud, get a particular bank, update a bank, or delete a bank. First of all, let's log into our Fusion Cloud application and see where those banks appear in the application. Okay, let me try to get one of the instance credentials. Okay, I've copied one of the instance. And let me ping this in the chat as well here. And I'll go into this URL. Let me log into the application. And I'll log in as fin_impl user, and I'll use the password. I think the password is saved. So I've logged into a the Fusion Cloud application as a fin_impl user. Okay, and if I scroll down, what do you see? Yeah, you see the list of navigation options, and I'm interested in figuring out the banks in this particular application. I want to see where the banks are configured. The banks are typically configured in a cache management module. Remember, you would have a requirement to configure your bank accounts, I mean the organization bank accounts or the client bank accounts, and you might also have to configure the supplier bank accounts and the customer bank accounts as well. So where do you set them up? You set them up in FSM. So you click on the drop down, go to setup and maintenance. And you can click on this task ribbon, and you can go into global search option, and you can search for a task called banks. Okay, so you say manage banks. Okay, so you open it up, and what do you see here? What you see here is a list of banks that you see, or a list of banks that you see within the application, right? And these banks. So if I have to look at the banks that exist in the application, this is how I do it. I log into the application. I'll search for manage banks task, and on the landing page, I get to see the banks. And if I want to edit a bank, if I want to see the details of the bank, I can click on it, and that will give me details of the bank in a read-only mode. So I'm able to see a specific bank details. And if I want, I can also create a bank by clicking on the plus icon here, and I can also edit a bank as well. So it's like within the application, I can see the list of banks. I can get a specific bank details. I can create a bank, edit a bank, right? I can perform all these operations. But what if you want to perform these operations from an integration you're building in OIC? Or if you want to perform what if you want to perform these operations with the help of REST API, or without even logging into the application, or not using a manual approach, you want to perform these operations? How do you do it? That is where these REST APIs help you. So you have these options, you have these APIs which will help you to perform CRUD operations on the bank. So if you see here, so you have 5 endpoints on the bank's resource, and these endpoints will help you to perform CRUD operations on the bank. So let's pick up this particular endpoint first. What will this endpoint help you with? It will fetch all the banks from ERP Cloud. And for each endpoint that you see, there are 2 important parameters that are mentioned here. There's a method and there is a path as well. So what you can do is you can copy these two inputs and you can paste it to the text pad. And that is what I've done. So the method is get, and the path is, or path or URI is this particular URL. So this particular URL, it is not something that you can invoke directly. So this is not a complete path. So to this path, what you need to do is, depending on from which application you want to get all the banks, you need to prefix the instance URL to this particular path. Okay, so this is not a complete path. This is only a relative path. And to this path, you need to prefix the instance URL. So say, for example, if you want to get all banks, from this particular application dev11 instance, what you have to do, you will have to prefix this particular instance URL. Okay, so all you have to do is prefix this particular instance URL here. Okay, you don't even need a port, that's okay. So this would be, this is the bank's URL. Let me replace this. Okay, so this is a ERP instance URL, right? That is nothing but ERP based URL. So the complete REST endpoint URL that you will be able to invoke is nothing but a combination of ERP based URL, I think there is a duplication there. Okay, yeah. So to come up with a complete endpoint URL that you should be able to invoke, so you need to concatenate those two. So you need to prefix the ERP base URL to the path that is mentioned in the documentation. So this is a URL mentioned, or this is a URI mentioned to get all banks. To this path, you have to prefix a ERP instance URL. And when you add these two, what do you get? You get this URL. So it is like in front of this path, you have to put an ERP base URL, and that will give you this complete path. So I have this path and I want to invoke it. And to invoke this, again, I think I have some duplicates there. Okay. And what I have to do is I need to invoke this API now. So if I want to invoke this endpoint. So if I invoke this endpoint, what do I get back? I get back the bank details, right? So to invoke this API, what you can do is you can go to Google and you can type in, you can search for a tool called Postman. You can search for a tool called Postman. Search for this particular tool and you can download the Postman tool. It's an executable file that gets downloaded. Go ahead, download it, and then install it. After you install it, you would see a shortcut like this appearing in your desktop. You would see a shortcut like this appearing on your desktop. Open that application or open that tool, and that is what we use to test the REST APIs. And when you open this tool for the first time, you will probably not see any requests. It will be a blank screen. And you will probably have to create a new request by clicking on the plus icon. You create a new request. And you will use this Postman tool to fire off a REST API. You will use this to invoke a REST API. So what is the URL that I need to use? I have the URL with me. So it is an instance, ERP instance, plus this particular path. Yes, I want to get all the banks from this application. So I've copied this instance, I've prefixed it to this path, and I've pasted it in the Postman tool. And whenever you invoke a REST API, you need to mention a method as well. So the REST APIs use HTTP methods for communication. REST APIs use HTTP methods for communication. Like if you're fetching some information, those APIs or those endpoints will use get method. If you're creating something, that you will have to use post method. If you're deleting something, you will have to use delete method. And if you're trying to update something, you will have to use a patch method for that. Okay. So in this endpoint, so we're trying to invoke this endpoint. So I need to use get method. So in the Postman tool, by default, whenever you create a new request, that will have a method selected as get method. Okay, so get method will be selected by default. You can leave it as such and you paste in the URL. And if you send a request, what will happen? What should happen? You should typically see an unauthorized error. Okay, I think there is one slash missing in there. That's why you're getting that weird error. So you go to Postman tool, you just put in that additional slash in there, and then you send a request. And when you send a request, what error you've got now? You've got unauthorized error, and it makes sense as well, right? So so the APIs that you see here, the standard APIs that Oracle exposes here, the REST APIs, to invoke them, you will have to pass in the valid authentication details. So, for example, what did we do to come down to this particular screen? What did we do? We access the application URL. We have logged into it. We have keyed in the username and password, and then we searched for a managed banks task in FSM, and we were able to come down to this. So, meaning without logging in, will we be able to see this information? Of course not. So the same restrictions apply here as well. Even if you try to use these endpoints to try to perform CRUD operations on the or in the ERP cloud application, you will still have to pass in authentication details. Without passing in authentication details, if you try to get some information from the cloud or push some information into cloud, you will get this unauthorized error. So how to resolve this? If these are not secured, anybody who is able to guess these first 4 or 5 letters within the application, they can walk away with my data, right? So let's say my instance is EPNG. So if someone by random types in EPNG and tries to get the banks, if these APIs are not secured, they will be able to read all the data, all the banks that I've configured in my application. So to avoid those data breaches, what Oracle has done is it has secured all the APIs. So only the authorized person will be able to perform CRUD operations, even if it is through a REST API. So how do you pass in authorization details? You go into authorization tab and you click on the drop down, you select basic authorization details, and you have to pass in the username password. So this is a username path. Enter it as fin_impl and enter the password, and you can send the request. And what do you see now? You see that you've got back a collection of banks. So you copy this and you paste it in a notepad. You could see that you've got back a collection of banks. You could probably call it as banks.json. So this particular output format, or the format in which you are receiving this payload, it is called as Json format, JSON. It stands for JavaScript object notation. And the way JavaScript object notation format looks like is you have the values mentioned as a key value pair. Like you have a key within the quotes, and you have a colon, and then you have a value, and you have comma, and you have a second key along with its value. So it's like a JSON is quite lightweight, and it is very performance efficient when compared to XML. So tomorrow we'll see how the SOAP services work, and at that point I'll show you how the XML format looks like. From the BIP session itself, we know how the XML format looks like, right? You have a start tag and end tag for each and every attribute. So that is a quite heavy payload. But a JSON payload is quite lightweight. All you have is just attribute name followed by its value. And of course, it needs to go into quotes, and you need to separate them by colon. And what did you get back here? What you have got back here is a collection of banks. So you see these items. What are these? These are nothing but collection of banks. And what is the first bank that we have received back, that we have received from the application? It's Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, right? So you go back into the application. What is the first bank that you see here? Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank. So whatever you see here, all those details are retrieved. We were able to pull that information with the help of REST API. So you could see the bank name, bank number, description, country name, etc. So all the details that you see in this particular screen, the list of banks, we were able to pull it. So what's the second bank that you see on the screen here? It's A21 Axis Bank, and that is what you see in the response here. So meaning with the help of this REST API or invoking this get all banks REST API, I'm able to pull the bank's information from ERP Cloud by invoking that API and passing in valid authentication details. But let's say you don't want to get all the banks. Instead, you want to get a particular bank. So when you say you want to get a particular bank, you have to let it know what bank you are interested in, right? So what you can do is at the end of the URL. So if you look at these two endpoints, get all banks and get a bank, they're almost similar. The method is same and the path is also same, almost the same. Okay, till the cash banks. But it's just that if you try to get a particular bank details, if you're interested in a specific bank, then you have to pass in bank party ID as a template parameter. So what Oracle did is it has exposed another endpoint, or it has exposed another endpoint, which will give you an option to pass in bank party ID as an input. And if you do so, you will get back only that particular bank details in the response. When we invoke this endpoint, what did we get back as a response? We've got back a collection of banks, right? You've got back a list of banks. So this is okay. I'm okay with it. But what if I want to get only a particular bank details? I'm not interested in all the bank details. Then you could make use of this endpoint. And how do you do it? What you can do is you can pick up one of the bank party ID and you put a slash at the end and you put your bank party ID in there, type in bank party ID in there. Because if you look at the endpoint is same, right? The path is same. It's just that you have to pass in bank party ID at the end. So I put a slash and I pass in the actual bank party ID here, the first bank party ID. Method is get authorization details also. I don't need to change, and I'll send the request. And this time, what did I get back? It's not a collection anymore. It's not a collection anymore. You don't have items and those arrow marks or array symbols. It's a single bank that you've got back. So if I copy this, and if I say save this as bank.json, what do you see here? You see that you've got back a single bank details. There's only one bank, no multiple banks. And all the bank details have been fetched. And similarly, if you want to, this is how you could pull the information, get all the banks or get a bank detail from ERP Cloud. But apart from pulling the information, you could also push the information to it. Meaning, if you want to create a bank, how can you do it within the application? All you have to do is click on the plus icon, and that will give you an option to enter the details there. Okay, and instead of doing that, if you want to create a bank from the API or using the API, what you can do, you can use create a bank endpoint. And if you look at this create a bank endpoint, so this particular path is exactly same as this path, right? So absolutely no change. So that means the endpoint that I need to use is exactly the same as a get all banks endpoint. So I go back to Postman. I will take off this ID that I'm passing at the end so that this becomes a get all banks endpoint, which is same as the create a bank endpoint. The path is exactly the same, but there's one difference there. I need to use a method called post for creating a bank, but while getting a bank details, I can use get, right? So since I'm trying to create a bank here, I'll have to use a method called post. And yes, I need to pass in authorization details. But what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to create a bank. So when you try to create a bank, so if you can you create a bank without entering any details there? Without entering any details, if you click on save and close, what will happen? It will throw an error saying that I cannot create a bank without entering the details, right? So in a similar fashion, when you try to create a bank from with the help of this REST API, you cannot create it without passing any bank details. So when you invoke create endpoints, you will typically pass in a request payload, and in that request payload, what you pass in, you will pass in the details with which a bank needs to be created. So not just create a bank, any create endpoints you see here, create a bank branch or create bank account or create a receivables invoice, you will have a sample payloads given by Oracle. So now we know that when we have to create something, we have to pass in a bank details, right? So if you have to create a bank, you have to pass in the bank details and the request payload. So if you don't know in what format you have to pass in a request payload, what you can do, you can get into the create bank endpoint. You can pick up a request payload given in the documentation. You copy it, and you have this is a sample payload given by Oracle. So you can copy it and paste it as is in the request body. Okay, so you go into the request body, click on draw, paste that bank details in, and you can change the format type to JSON. And you pick up the bank. And first of all, let's see if this bank already exists in the application or not. So you go back, cancel this, see if the bank is already created, yes or no. So you can search for the banks here, search for the bank, and you could see that this particular bank doesn't exist in the application. So I'll try to use the sample payload as is, or we'll probably call it as, Geeks Bank. And you can say, Geeks Bank, a description. And you can leave out the bank number and the taxpayer ID number as is. And you can send the request. What will happen now? This particular API will create a bank in ERP Cloud now with these details. And you will also get back a response as well. Okay, I think it was not clicked earlier. So it's sending a request now. And what will happen? A bank in ERP Cloud will get created with this particular name, Geeks Bank. Let's see if it gets created or not successfully. And you should also get back a response. And in that response, you will have a bank party ID that is associated or that is generated for the Geeks Bank. Okay, what do you see here? You've got back you've got back a bank party ID, means the bank is created in ERP Cloud and its details have been fetched back. So if you come here and if you search for Geeks Bank, it would have been created by now. Yeah, you could see the bank created, and you can also look at the details. So it has been created with the details that we have entered in the screen, or that we have entered in the payload here. Okay, and this is basically a JSON payload. So JSON payload goes into the curly braces. You have attribute in quotes, colon, and you pass in the value in the quotes again. And if you pass multiple values, you have to separate them by comma. Okay, and if you go back, so this is how you could make use of the REST APIs to perform CRUD operations on the business objects in the Fusion Cloud application, be it financials, be it SCM, or any entity. Okay, you have similar REST APIs available for HCM as well. Now let's go back to the PPT. So REST APIs, REST stands for Representational State Transfer. That's a full form of REST APIs. And in REST APIs, everything is REST APIs or they use the REST architecture. And in the REST architecture, everything we refer to as a resource. And REST web services are quite lightweight and highly scalable and maintainable. That's because they use a JSON format. So they use this particular JSON format, which is quite lightweight. And they deliver better performance than SOAP services. We haven't discussed SOAP services yet. We'll do it tomorrow. But yes, the REST APIs deliver better performance than SOAP services. And REST APIs are widely used in web application build. So typically, what do we mean by web applications? You can think of them as websites. Like when it comes to websites, it is quite critical. The performance is quite critical, right? So if you go into a website and if it takes 5 seconds or 10 seconds to load, you will probably not wait for the page to load, and you would have probably moved on to the next website that you might have probably got on the Google search, right? So performance is quite critical in web-based applications, and that is where REST APIs help. And REST APIs are extensively used in there. And REST APIs use JSON format for communication. In fact, this is one of the reasons why the REST APIs are or deliver better performance and why they are lightweight. Okay, so REST APIs have 3 attributes. It has the path that you need to invoke, or URI that you need to invoke, and it also has methods as well, HTTP methods. And those HTTP, so each REST endpoint, it will have a method and it will have the path or URI. So these two are the important bits on REST API. Every REST API will have that. It will have a resource identifier and it will have a method. And along with it, it will also have a data transfer. So you could, one of the common misconception that students typically carry is that they think that REST APIs will only work with JSON. That's not true. Yes, in most of the scenarios when you use REST APIs, you will use JSON format for communication because it's quite lightweight. But REST APIs will also work with XML format. Okay, so don't think that REST APIs only work with JSON. They work with XML as well. But if you use XML, then the whole purpose of using a REST APIs is lost. I mean, the performance benefit that you get in REST APIs when compared to SOAP services, that would be lost. Okay, and this is what we have done. We went into the standard documentation URL. We picked up 2 or 3 endpoints. So we picked up 3 endpoints to be precise. And yes, we pick up an endpoint from the URL. We had to prefix a ERP based URL, and then you have to concatenate those two together to come up with a complete URL. And then you can invoke those endpoints to perform those CRUD operations, to fetch the information from a Fusion application and to pull the information from cloud application and to push the information to cloud. Okay, so we'll see the SOAP services. We'll cover SOAP services tomorrow. Any questions, guys? Any questions in what we covered today?
No questions, sir.
No. Perfect. Practice this after the session, whenever you get time today or tomorrow, and do let me know if you have any questions. Thank you, guys, and thanks for your time. I'll meet again tomorrow then, and we'll cover SOAP services.